Now, I'm sure by now you've seen the Retribution Paladin buffs that are coming to Classic, either on Wowhead or the Blue Post or even videos here on YouTube. Well, I want to break it down a little bit and look at what potential game we're going to get and how these changes are going to impact gameplay, and ultimately, are you going to do any more damage? Now, for non-cleave fights, we know Ret Paladins struggle on single target DPS, and it does come to no surprise. It was historically the case back in Wrath of the Lich King, and everyone just sits and waits for that two-piece tier 10, thinking it's going to skyrocket you to the top of the charts. I have no comment on that. Now, I'm not going to sit here and read through this post, but I will just highlight the two big changes. So the first one is the fact that we're going to get a major glyph, which is Glyph of Reckoning, where your Hand of Reckoning spell no longer taunts the target and can deal damage to untauntable targets. Now, I've actually tested this to see roughly what sort of damage we're expecting to see from it, and this is testable by you and your setup on your character in-game right now. We'll talk about how in just a second. The second part is that Holy Vengeance and Blood Corruption dot effects from Seal of Vengeance and Seal of Corruption may now be applied by Divine Storm and Crusader Strike in addition to normal melee hits. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with Ret Paladins, then Seal of Corruption basically fills the Paladin with holy power, causing attacks to apply Blood Corruption, which is your dot. It deals 604 holy damage over 15 seconds with the gear that I've got currently equipped. Blood Corruption can stack up to 5 times. Each of the Paladin's attacks also deals up to 37% weapon damage as additional holy damage. This is based on the number of stacks. So getting this stacked up quick is obviously incredibly important. The quicker you get to 5 stacks, the quicker you're getting maximum return out of that, not just from the actual dot itself, but also from the additional percentage of damage you're going to get on each swing. Now, let's first look at the least impactful change, which is not the glyph. The glyph is going to be the most impactful. But how quick can we now stack corruption up? So I timed it, and every time, taking into consideration that Crusader Strike and Divine Storm would both apply a stack, it averaged between 5 and 6 seconds with no haste buff, no heroism, no potion of speed. The only thing I was using was my glove enchant on some of the pulls. And it would always average around 5 to 6 seconds to get that full 5 stack up, assuming that we was playing in the new buffed state where Crusader Strike and Divine Storm would apply the dot. But with the current way it works today, you're looking at around 12 to 13 seconds to get a full 5 stack up. Now, this can delay when you're going to use your cooldowns, when you're going to pop trinkets, because you're going to wait for your 5 stack to get maximum benefit out of that seal. So the difference between 12 and 13 seconds now versus the 5 to 6 seconds that we're going to see once it's actually buffed is pretty huge. And again, you can make this 20% faster technically with melee haste, even quicker with heroism. So it's not going to take long to get that 5 stack at all. All of these timings are done with a 3.6 speed weapon. Of course, it goes on weapon speed on how quick you get these stacked up. So if you was using, for example, this 1.8 speed weapon, you'd absolutely get them up quicker than I am with a 3.6 speed weapon. Now, that seems minor, but on a target swap, for example, you know, a new ad spawns that you have to prioritize, let's say like the Animus, for example, on Vezak's hard mode, or even when your target switching between, you know, Brundir to Mulgheim to Steelbreaker, or vice versa, you know, whichever way around you're doing it on Iron Council, getting those stacks up nice and quick is just a big, big benefit. Not as big as the glyph change. Now, when you're hitting the target dummy in Orgrimmar or Stormwind or wherever you're on the target dummies, they aren't targeting you, so they absolutely are tauntable. So you can test Hand of Reckoning and see how much extra damage you're going to actually get from it. And remember, the better your gear, the harder Hand of Reckoning is going to hit, because it scales from 50% of your attack power. Not only is that very easy to see in game by highlighting over the tooltip in your spellbook and seeing mine does 2092 holy damage, get rid of a pair of bracers, it goes down to 1991. So absolutely, gear makes a big difference. You can also see this in the patch notes. As you can see here, back in 3.2, it was redesigned where damage done is increased by 50% of your attack power. So actually, the further through the tiers we get, the better gear you get, the more damage this is actually going to do, and it does a remarkable amount of damage. But the first thing you're going to want to do is actually macro Hand of Reckoning into all of your abilities. Please don't macro this into your abilities and forget that you've done it and then go into a raid and wipe. Make sure you make a separate macro specifically for Hand of Reckoning testing on the dummies. You can see that I'm using my glove cooldown, which is my engineering cooldown. That's purely because I just want that extra bit of haste just to try and get it as realistic as possible to how quick you could stack corruption when I was doing that testing. As you can see, see, it's simply cast Hand of Reckoning, cast Crusader Strike. You want the same for Divine Storm. You want the same for Exorcism. So no matter what ability you're pressing, it's always going to try and use Hand of Reckoning as well, because you've got to remember, Hand of Reckoning isn't on the GCD. So I was just doing the very basic rotation and just making sure that I was Hand of Reckoning as much as possible. Now, this does mean that when everything is on cooldown, I'm still spamming Crusader Strike or Judgment or whatever. I'm not sat there waiting for the ability to be able to be pressed. Whilst now, like when I press Consecrate, I'm already spamming my next ability just to make sure that if Hand of Reckoning happens to come off cooldown at that specific moment in time, I'm already pressing it. I didn't use wings, and all I've done was just literally DPS this target dummy for about 2.5 minutes, well, basically until I went ohm. And the results were quite shocking, and I genuinely mean that. I was really surprised by the amount of damage that Hand of Reckoning doing and how much it's actually going to do for us in raids. Because you got to remember, I'm not fully buffed here. I'm losing 10% attack power by not being with an enhancement shaman. Obviously, I'm going to be losing attack speed, which isn't going to make a difference, don't get me wrong, to Hand of Reckoning, but still, you get the point. Buffed, you're going to do even more. And if we look at the breakdown of damage on that fight, where I've done 688k, total damage over around 2.5 minutes, Hand of Reckoning was the third hardest hitting spell, only to be beaten out by Seal of Corruption and Melee. That is actually crazy. 10.6% overall of my overall damage added on, which is actually higher. So when comparing that to things like Crusader Strike, Consecrate, Judgment of Corruption, Divine Storm, Exorcism, all these things, Hand of Reckoning is actually hitting pretty hard. Did it surprise you how much damage it done? It genuinely surprised me. Do I think this is going to all of a sudden skyrocket Paladins to the top of the meters? Absolutely not. But what I do think it's going to do is just be a nice enough little bump to all of a sudden start seeing you creep up. If you're exceptionally well geared or exceptionally well skilled, you might actually be able to start outperforming some people that are not exceptionally geared or skilled, which is absolutely welcomed. I'm not going to drag this out any longer than it needs to be, so if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. See you later.